But if you cool really slowly, you've got a problem if you cool really slowly and you have no cracking up to a point, the cracking is worse if the cracking begins at a lower temperature than it is if it begins at a higher temperature. So the cracks get finer and finer. So if cracking is inevitable, you might as well crack at a higher temperature rather than a lower temperature. Get the thermal stress over with as soon as possible and avoid this kind of mess, this kind of cracking. Next slide. So the Cryonics Institute revised its protocol in light of this data and putting in a rapid cooling step, to force cracking at a higher temperature. Next slide. So for Curtis Henderson, this was the cooling protocol we did. We held it about minus 100 Celsius for a day, and then about minus 120 per day, and then rapid cooling to force the cracking at a higher temperature, and then exponential cooling after that, slow cooling to liquid nitrogen temperature. Next slide. So actually, propylene glycol actually vitrifies at a fairly high temperature. So, and the experiments done in 1990 were being done with pure cryoprotectant solution. And actually, there's less thermal strain in biological tissues that have been vitrified than there is in pure cryoprotectant solution. Next slide. So another alternative approach has been an intermediate storage temperature. Why not just store the patients at minus 140, which they'll be in a solid vitrified state, and just keep them at that temperature instead of going down to liquid nitrogen temperature and avoid the cracking. But it's going to be much more expensive. A system was sent to Alcor in December 2008, and they're still evaluating it to figure out how to implement it, or whether they want to implement it even. And the Cryonics Institute has no plans for an intermediate storage temperature system. Next slide. There's also a possibility of radiation damage. Cryogenic temperature doesn't prevent ionizing radiation or breaking of chemical bonds. That's going to happen in any case. But it can protect against radiation damage by reducing the mobility of reactive species generated by the radiation. The lower the temperature, the less these free radical species are going to be, the less mobile they are, and the more protected you are at a lower temperature. Next slide. And one experiment showing acetylcholinesterase enzyme X-ray irradiated showed conformational change at minus 118 Celsius, but not at minus 173. And X-ray irradiated insulin crystals showed 4 times as much damage to disulfide bridges at minus 173 degrees Celsius at minus 223 degrees Celsius. So you get some protection by having a lower temperature from this radiation damage. During 8-cell mouse embryos that were stored for 5 to 8 months in liquid nitrogen and subjected to about 2,000 years of background gamma ray radiation showed no effect on survival or development. So liquid nitrogen temperature seems to be pretty safe, at least from this evidence, safe from radiation damage. Next slide. So how bad is the cracking problem really? You've got a lot of things to fix. If you break a vase and you break it in 3 or 4 pieces, you can patch it together pretty easily. And the more pieces you have, not the same thing as being pulverized. And certainly, cracking problem is not as bad as the freezing damage. Freezing damage is much worse. You're really pulverizing the tissue. So is it really worth going to a lot of effort to eliminate the cracking problem when you have so much else to repair anyway? I mean, it sounds like a cynical view, but it's not cheap. Intermediate temperature storage. Next slide. Just to show you the storage vessels we use at the Cryonics Institute, we use these fiberglass thermos bottles basically, and Alcor is using these Dewars, which are steel thermos bottles basically. Next slide. And as I say, they're steel. The doors have a high vacuum. The vacuum holes. The cryostats, the vacuum has to be pumped every other month, and we add perlite insulation plus the vacuum. But reputedly, cryostats are twice as efficient for size as steel vessels. The fiberglass resin conducts heat much less readily than steel, so there is an advantage to fiberglass resin. Next slide. So just say a few words about reanimation repair. This is not a subject I spend much time thinking about. I really don't think I can figure out what future technology is going to be able to do. My emphasis is almost entirely on how can we preserve the structure as best as possible, and the future technology is going to have to figure out what to do, and it's going to involve things that are just we can't know about right now. But we should know enough about it, or think enough about it, probably to think it's reasonable that it will exist. So one thing, what about repairing all this damage? How are we going to repair all this damage from nanomachines and nanobots? If we've got a damaged patient with a lot of cracking damage and freezing damage and so forth, and needs to be rejuvenated. If we warm that patient up, it's going to turn to mush. We really want to warm the patient up and get these nanomachines working on mush. What good is that going to do us? So it seems like we're going to have to, we're getting a liquid phase possibly above minus 123. So even if biochemical reactions are halted, the diffusion is not halted. You can still get loss of structure. Next slide. So how would these, if we're going to do repair at cryogenic temperatures, how are these tiny robots, these nanobots, going to move around? And how are they going to have enough energy to make and break chemical bonds? And how can they be powered at these temperatures? What's the power source? And how can billions of these nanobots communicate in a wireless fashion? Next slide. Well, Ralph Merkel and Robert Freitas have some suggestions. They say that you can have dynamoid molecular machines and nanobots that can operate at these temperatures. They say that they can be powered by electrostatic motors. I don't understand that one. But anyway, and also 80% of the brain is water or cryoprotectant. So you can drill through a lot of the brain. These little machines could drill through a lot of the brain, all the solid at cryogenic temperatures without damaging subjects, structure, as long as they know where they're going. And you're not in a hurry. If you're repairing at cryogenic temperatures, you can spend years doing the repair necessary before warming up to higher temperatures to do further repairs. Also the nanobots, if they can communicate with external computers, they could do massive computation. The external computers could take on a massive portion of the computational burden that would be required. Next slide. So if none of that works, as a last resort, you could do destructive analysis of the brain. You use at cryogenic temperatures. You digitize the information and use that to construct a brain with new material. And you have the microfilm slicing and recording the brain at the cryogenic temperature. Once you have all that information, you can make duplicates of you. Next slide. So just one more plug for Asher and Sean's company. As they say, they're weekend researchers. It would be great if there was money for them to work full time. They can investigate things like reperfusion injury, improve perfusion for ischemic cases, which they've already been doing, reducing cryoprotectant toxicity, and other issues of interest to cryonics. But you won't get conventional medical researchers investigating any of these topics. It's just what we're interested in, what conventional medical researchers are interested in is so different that we just have to do this work ourselves. Next slide. And that's where you go for further information. Thanks. I think I went over time. Nobody stopped me. There'll be plenty of time for questions.
Yeah, we're well in time, so we can have several questions. If nobody, I'll give you a minute because I've got one. Oh, Michael, then you start.
I think it was like 22 when you said that persons being dead for 2.5 hours had up to 90% survival rates of brain cells, I think.
Of the neurons, right?
The neurons, yeah.
Close to neurons.
At which temperature were they laying the persons?
Oh, I don't know, but I would assume that they were just normally, when a person dies, they're taken to the morgue and kept, cool at probably minus 4 degrees Celsius.
Minus 4.
Yeah, but it also takes them a while to cool down too. They're not putting them in an ice bath. So.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question for those sitting at the back. Could you understand the question well, or should we have it repeated over the microphone?
Volume is good for me, but I'm
Okay. David.
Yeah, you mentioned protein ice blockers, Ben. Do you know if there's a pressing reason that they're not being used in cryonics?
Well, the most important, the most valuable, well, they are being used in cryonics. The Alcor uses them. There's ice blockers in N22. The Cryonics Institute doesn't. The Cryonics Institute VM1 is much more a stronger cryoprotectant than N22. N22 is the cryoprotectant, the vitrification solution that was used to vitrify these rabbit kidneys and bring them back. So there's a lot of emphasis with N22, what they're doing to minimize toxicity and to increase viability. And so by using ice blockers, you can have a less toxic cryoprotectant. But a much more expensive cryoprotectant. The Cryonics Institute, we're not focused on rewarming. It's just not. Our goal is to preserve structure as best we can, and as cheap, as efficiently as we can, and cheaply as we can, frankly. And so using expensive ice blockers when we had no, we're hoping the future technology can have to do a lot of repair anyway. So I don't see any point for the Cryonics Institute using ice blockers. And as I say, what Alcor uses is they're using the same thing for their cryonics patients as is being used for the kidney work and the other research done by 21st Century Medicine.